Alright guys, we're going to go over a lot of stuff in this little lecture. The good news is it's a recording, so you're welcome to pause and come back to it, take a break. But there's a lot of very important information in this that you're going to need to know for the mental health, the Unit 2 test. Okay? So first of all, we just give a definition of mental and emotional health, the ability to accept yourself and others, accepting yourself, that's kind of like self-esteem, express and manage your emotions, deal with the demands and challenges you meet in your life. So that's a pretty basic definition of mental and emotional health, but still important for you to understand. We're going to be defining a lot of terms and then also going over a lot of mental illnesses. So you might have to revisit, maybe watch this or go back and hear something again or whatever, or even on your own do a little more research or go find a video. I actually have quite a few videos that I've posted in GradPoint. I think I labeled it mental health unit videos or something, but anyway, so sorry, that's the bell. So find a video, do something that's going to help you really understand these terms, and then the disorders we're going to get to a little bit later. So depression, notice how I have prolonged underlined. That's because at times we all feel helpless or sad or hopeless. But depression is when it's over a long period of time, when you just can't get out of that quote unquote funk, when you're not motivated to do anything, like get out of bed, for example. So that's when it would be probably a good idea to go and see a doctor about that. Anxiety, I think we've all heard this term, used this term, maybe, or hopefully we're all familiar with this, just the condition of feeling uneasy or worried about what may happen. I want you to remember anxiety, that basic definition, when we start to talk about anxiety disorders, because there's quite a few that fall under that. Apathy, or you might have heard apathetic before. So this is a lack of strong feeling, interest, or concern. I don't mean to call out students on this, but that's the first example that comes to mind in my classroom. I struggle really bad with those that are apathetic. They just couldn't care less. They don't care about anything, and I see that in their body language and their lack of turning things in. And it's frustrating as a teacher because I really want my students to learn, but it goes both ways. They've got to have that desire and then that effort as well. So apathy, a lack of strong feeling, interest, or concern. Stigma. So in one of the videos, I found a video about stigma, and I really, really want you to go and watch that video about stigma. I want you to understand that this is a negative. This is a negative term, like a mark of shame or disapproval that results in an individual being shunned. So I kind of view stigma kind of like stereotype. Stigma is strictly negative. There's maybe a group of people or a label that's put on them, where for whatever reason, because they wear this or they talk like that or they look like this or whatever, there's that mark of shame or disapproval. And so the actions or whatever it happens to them after that mark of shame has been put on them, is usually a negative thing. They're usually leads to bullying and just really treating people like garbage, to be honest. So I really encourage you to go watch that video about stigma. It's really good. Resiliency, or being resilient. I like to think of a basic definition for this as the ability to bounce back. The actual definition you can see here: adapt effectively, recover from disappointment. I like to use little kids as an example of resiliency. If you are ever watching a little toddler go running around or whatever, and all of a sudden they fall down, most of the time they're going to get right back up and continue to play. And that's a very small example of resiliency, but that's, they recovered, they didn't let whatever it was that made them fall keep them down. They got back up and they kept going. And if we can learn to do those things, then it's only going to help us throughout the rest of our life. So please remember these terms. You'll see them again, I promise. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because there's a lot of stuff to cover in this PowerPoint, but building resiliency, so being able to bounce back up and recover from disappointment, you kind of need to be healthy in all aspects. You need to make sure you're getting adequate rest, you're getting enough exercise, you're eating a balanced diet, try to limit, I don't think you can avoid, but you can limit your stress. Thinking positively, like little things can help you when something comes up that like kind of throws you for a loop. You're just like, oh, I got this. You kind of hit the reset button and you keep going. So that's being resilient. These are just some characteristics of healthy mental and emotional health. I'll let you kind of just look over them. Most of you should know what this means, but just know self-sufficiency. Basically, you don't need mom and dad to hold your hand. You can kind of do things on your own, which should be your goal, by the way. This reminds me, I have an acronym that I like to use about being positive. The acronym is PACE, P-A-C-E, stands for Positive Attitude Changes Everything. So I want you to think about that, like, if you really do think about that, like, if you have a positive outlook and you try to think optimistically instead of pessimistically, then you're probably going to have the one up on a lot of other people, because I think the go-to in today's world is just to think negative, and that can really start to destroy you mentally. And then it will kind of leak into other aspects of your health. Self-esteem, how much you value, respect, and feel confident about yourself. I get pretty saddened to see how many of my students have very little or no self-esteem. I see this in their writing in the assignments they turn into my class. And it's sad. It's sad to see how many people just don't think highly of themselves. So it's important to develop those skills, like to start to think positively, surround yourself with people that are positive and show you love them, and vice versa, you show you love them, or they show they love you. Because being confident in yourself will kind of go a long ways just throughout the rest of your life. You've got to be able to be confident in yourself before you can pursue I would even say other relationships. You have to be able to love yourself before you can love someone else. Your personality or personal identity, just remember that those might be used interchangeably. Personality or personal identity. Include your interests, likes, dislikes, talents, abilities, values, beliefs, goals. All these things make up your personal identity. By the way, this is pretty cool. It's like sidewalk chalk art. So that is flat, but it looks 3D. Pretty cool, huh? All right, so stages of grief. One thing I want you to understand about stages of grief is that someone might experience maybe only denial and then acceptance. Others might get super angry at first, not even go to denial or numbness. They're just angry and then they accept it. Or maybe they're angry and then they experience some depression and then they accept it. There's not one order that these go in, and you don't experience all of them necessarily. So like denial would be, here's an example, like let's say an elderly guy, he loses his wife, she passes away. If his kids are over and he insists that his wife just went to the store to get groceries, he's kind of in denial. And it could include numbness as well. Some people, depending on whatever it is in their life that happens, like they just get super angry and will take it out on anyone and everyone around them. Bargaining, a lot of the times it has to do with like a higher power, but if you think about what bargaining means just in general, then it could potentially be with someone else too, a human being here. But like a lot of times people will bargain with their higher power. Like if you save my grandma's life, I'll stop doing this or whatever. You do this, I'll do this. Depression, just kind of have this stage of just being down. One of my best friends lost her brother to cancer a few years ago, and she was one of the happiest people I've ever met, and that took her into depression. And that was probably the biggest stage of grief she experienced. And then eventually their family accepted it. And one thing I want to mention about acceptance is it doesn't mean that you don't care or like the feelings towards that are gone. It's just that you've been able to accept what's happened so that you can go back to the way you should be as far as your mental health goes. I hope that makes sense. Just know that if people, once they get to the acceptance stage, then it's not like they've forgotten what happened. They've accepted it and they're able to move on. There's a pretty entertaining video about stages of grief in that on that page that I told you about, with where all the videos are, by the way. All right, so Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's also a video on this that I think is entertaining. It's about Monsters, Inc. But basically, Maslow, he was a psychologist, and he came up with this hierarchy of needs. It's this pyramid, and basically what he says is, I like this little quote that he had, like, you're motivated to achieve certain needs, some take precedence over the others. Our most basic need for survival is the first thing we'll focus on. That's what motivates our behavior. So like if we are starving, we're probably going to go and look for food or water or whatever. Once that need is met, then the next level up happens, and that's what motivates you. So then safety is the next level. So you'll start to seek out being secure and safe, feeling safe. And then once that happens, then you continue to move up in the pyramid. Notice on this side, these are the basic needs. These are the psychological needs. Whether you want to believe it or not, everyone needs to feel like they are loved, like you belong. Your friends, everyone needs to have a good friend or a group of friends. And then your esteem needs. So just your feeling of accomplishment. Once these are achieved, then you're kind of motivated to start to feel like you've been able to accomplish certain things. Or just like achieve that feeling of accomplishment. And then the higher up one, or the highest one, is self-actualization, achieving your potential. So a lot of people, I would say there's not very many people that actually can say they've reached self-actualization. You've reached your full potential. We're all striving for that, I think, throughout our whole lives. So hopefully you understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Again, I highly encourage you to go and watch that video. It takes you through each of the stages or each of the steps of the pyramid, and it shows you examples from Monsters, Inc. So that's actually pretty cool. All right, so moving on to fight or flight. So many of you have probably heard this before. It's also known as acute stress response, but it's pretty much the physiological reaction that occurs in the presence of something terrifying that's happening either mentally or physically. So what happens is your sympathetic nervous system is activated, and your adrenal glands release adrenaline. So you've probably heard adrenaline, that's kind of what gets your heart rate increased, your blood pressure, your breathing. It's all going to increase. The things that you're seeing right here, this is all happening because of what's going on with hormones in your body. It can happen with physical danger, like let's say you're a runner, and I've experienced this before, I'm not gonna lie, like you encounter a growling dog and it's huge, or even like a small dog, I don't know, that just starts to chase you on a run or whatever, like that could trigger it. Or it could be like a psychological threat, like preparing to give a big presentation at school, or maybe in the future at work. That could trigger that response as well. So I mentioned a little bit before, some signs would be rapid heart beating, breathing. So these are things that happen when that hormone, when adrenaline is released in your body. Pale or flushed skin, as you're seeing in this picture, dilated pupils, and trembling. So something that you need to know about fight or flight is that the response can be triggered due to both real and imaginary threats. So that's kind of interesting that it can come on with imaginary threats as well. Some might ask, like, why does our body do this? Like, why do we need this to happen in our bodies? And really what's happening is it's priming your body for action. So you're better prepared to perform under pressure. So like the type of stress can help you perform better in situations where you're under pressure, like that presentation at school or work. If this response has happened, then it's like it's preparing you to be on your A game or whatever, however you want to word that, you know what I mean? So it's gearing you up to fight or flee. The fight or flight response is going to make it more likely that you'll survive the danger because of the things that's happening in your body, the physical things that are going on in your body. All right, so we're going to start moving on to our disorders and cover some anxiety disorders. So all of these that you're seeing on this slide are under the anxiety category. You're going to need to know this. You're going to need to know what each of these are, the basic understanding of those, the basic definition, and then also that they fall under the anxiety category. So phobia disorder, you guys have probably all heard of phobias. This is like extreme fear where it's affecting your life. If you're extremely afraid of elevators, you're going to take 50 flights of stairs. I apologize for those that are extremely afraid of spiders or snakes. That's why I put these on there, not to like freak you out, but like to show that that's kind of what phobias are. Some people are extremely afraid of spiders and snakes. One of my friends over the weekend I was talking to, she said her mom is extremely afraid of cats. I thought that was kind of interesting. I'd never heard that before. And I guess the only way she'll go to her son's house when, because her son has a cat, the only way she'll stay there is if she can see the cat the whole time. She doesn't want any like sneak attack or whatever. I don't know. But extreme fear of certain things would be phobia. There are some pretty crazy phobias. If you Google phobias or phobia list, there are hundreds, and there are pretty interesting phobias out there. Obsessive compulsive disorder. There's a video about this on, I think I put a video about this on the unit video page. So basically there's two parts to it. There's the obsessive part, okay? It's this unwanted thought that comes into your head. And then there's the compulsive part. So the compulsive part is the thing that you do to get rid of that unwanted thought. The hard thing about this is that it just keeps happening. Like, here's some examples. So like, someone that is really like struggling with this, because I think that some of us have OCD tendencies, you know, like some of you might eat certain colors of Skittles or M&Ms first, or you bundle them together. Or a lot of my students have expressed that if they're watching TV or listening to the radio, the volume has to be like a 0 or 5, you know, those increments. So I think we have those tendencies, but people that have OCD, it really controls their life. So going back to the example that I was going to talk about, let's say you get out of bed, you have to put your right foot down first, or you're getting dressed, you have to put your left foot in first into your pants or whatever. You're putting deodorant on, you have to put it on 3 times. Like some people have a number, so they'll like turn the light switch on and off 3 times if that's their number. They'll buckle up and unbuckle 3 times. So I think you can kind of understand, or you can start to see that this really can start to affect someone's life. If they're having to repeat something that many times, especially if their number is like 10, I can see how it can really become a big problem for them. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Let's see if I can move this out of the way. So PTSD. This was once known as shell shock, because a lot of times when we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, it's because of war veterans. But that's not the only reason. I mean, a lot of traumatic experiences could be like natural disasters, could be car accidents, could be any kind of abuse, whether that's physical, mental, emotional, sexual, any kind of abuse. Those are all traumatic experiences. So there's 3 different levels, or I guess stages within post-traumatic stress. One would be where it's avoiding. So let's say that you got into a car accident. Now this might be a little extreme, but if you got into a car accident, maybe the avoiding part would be you avoid getting in a car. Or the avoiding part would be you can never go to that part of the city or town or whatever where you got into your accident. Maybe it was on the freeway. So you have to like go around that area because it just brings back too many memories. Avoiding, another one would be increased arousal. So what that means is just that you're super jumpy. and like let's say someone just kind of taps you from behind on the shoulder, you might literally like turn around and try to like hit them. That's like the increased arousal. That's you being super jumpy. And then I'm trying to think of what is the third one. So we have increased arousal, avoiding, and I can't remember, but it's pretty much, oh, reliving. Yeah. So it's like your nightmares or whatever. Let's say that you were in the war, or, yeah, let's say like you were in the war and, or someone you know was in the war and they were part of like the combat, and, you know, during the 4th of July, there's fireworks, or even like a car backfires or whatever. That might cause some serious problems for them. Some people will wake up from having a nightmare where they've relived that experience. So that can really control people's lives as well. Then you have generalized anxiety disorder. So this is basically persistent and excessive worry about a number of things. It could be like you're overly concerned about money, your health, family, work. People with GAD find it very difficult to control their worry. Basically how you're diagnosed is when you find it difficult to control your worry on more days than not for at least 6 months. So that's just consulting with the doctor. That's when they'll know, or they'll kind of diagnose you with it. So people with GAD, they don't really know how to stop the worry cycle. They feel like it's beyond their control. This, you know, symptoms, it could also be known as anxiety, just like generally anxiety. So feeling nervous, having this sense of danger, panic, or doom. Maybe your heart rate is increased, your breathing starts to increase as well and becomes rapid, and even like hyperventilation, which could be dangerous. Maybe you feel weak or tired. So these are all symptoms of anxiety. And then with panic disorder, this is where people will experience spontaneous, out of the blue panic attacks. And they're very preoccupied with the fear of a recurring attack. And it could happen unexpectedly anywhere. Just anywhere it could happen. And that's kind of what makes it pretty interesting with this one is, I mean, you could even be like sleeping and then all of a sudden you wake up and because of a panic attack, or you wake up and then you start to have a panic attack. You usually it begins around adulthood. But, you know, there are some kids that may experience these different panic attacks. So some symptoms of a panic or anxiety attack, you know, the same as like just anxiety in general, you're going to see a lot of the same symptoms as far as like trembling or shaking, or maybe sweating, or your heart pounding, accelerated heart rate. But other things might be like nausea or feeling dizzy, chills, or heat sensation. So, I mean, these things definitely would be a good idea to go and see a doctor about these things if you or someone you know is experiencing them, because there are some treatment plans that can really help people with these anxiety disorders. All right, moving on to impulse control disorders. I'm telling you guys, we have a little ways to go with this. So if you need a break, pause, go walk around, grab a drink, grab something to eat, come back so that you can focus, because this is very important stuff that you're going to need to know for the test. So impulse control is another category. Basically, impulse control disorders, what that means is you can't resist the urge to hurt yourself or others. So hurt, you know, you kind of have to think about what that would mean in these specific scenarios. Sometimes it's like mentally or emotionally hurting others. But others, it's physically, like cutting. So kleptomania, this has always been a very interesting disorder to me. You give in to the impulse to steal for no great gain. Like you really probably could afford whatever it is that you want to steal, but you just have this urge or desire to take it. You have enough money, you can get it, you can buy it, in most cases, but you have that urge, so you do it. And a lot of people get that rush when they steal, and that's kleptomania. Cutting, you know, there's a lot of reasons why people cut. Reasons that my students have given me in my class are that, you know, they don't feel, so that's their way of feeling something. That's their way of maybe the pain leaving their body. I don't know, maybe it's just to kind of get back at someone, or there's a lot of reasons why people cut, but hopefully you can see why that's not a good idea, a good way to cope with things, to actually just go out and seek help from someone, go and talk to someone, go and talk to a trained professional about it. Pyromania, basically you just love fires. You love setting things on fire, which can cause a lot of damage. Okay, so we have excessive gambling. That can be dangerous. It's when you get in that zone of gambling. Let's say that you lose a couple, then your mentality's like, oh, like I got to do one more, and it stays that way. Or like, let's say you're up and you're winning. You're like, well, maybe I can make more. More often than not, that mentality, like, oh, I'll make more, I'll bet more, and I'll win more, or whatever, you end up losing everything. Compulsive shopping is just like, you just like to buy things, you have the urge to buy, and then later on you kind of realize, like, crap, what did I do? I had a friend one time that admitted to being like this, where she'd buy, and then like she had to waste her time taking things back. So it's best to get a grip on that, get a handle on it, to make sure that you're saving that time of having to return things. And then a more serious, not that these others aren't serious, but addictions. This is pretty big deal. This is serious, because addictions can ruin people and their relationships with everyone around them. We talk a lot about, in my health class in school, about the addiction to drugs and how that just destroys people. It destroys you physically, but it also destroys you in other areas as well. You've already done things with your health triangle. It destroys every aspect of your health. So addiction is not a healthy thing. Going on to eating disorders, bulimia. Basically bulimia is you binge, okay, so you'll just eat whatever, and then the guilt sets in or whatever, and so you purge, so you throw it up. Not healthy. One of the reasons, among all the reasons that we can talk about, but one of the reasons, if you think about it, is you're exposing your teeth to that stomach acid all the time, so it's going to erode your teeth. And then anorexia, if you see this picture, like, people that have eating disorders literally do see themselves like this. It's like a distortion. And so anorexia is they don't eat, and if they do, it is very, very little. Something to keep in mind is that our heart is a muscle, and if we aren't eating, our body is going to go into itself and start to eat muscle to try and survive and give us energy, and so it's eventually going to affect the heart, which is how it can lead to death. So eating disorders are nothing to kid about. They are serious stuff. Our mood disorders, we have depression. There are millions of Americans that are suffering with depression. We talked about the definition of that earlier. And then bipolar, basically the extremes. There's this mania extreme where you're super happy, everything's great, and then it could switch in an instant to disaster, pretty much. If these things are happening, if you're experiencing those kinds of transitions, then what does it hurt to go and talk to a doctor about it? They're trained professionals. Just talking a little bit more about depression, there's different types. So the major type is intense and lasts for weeks and months. The mild one is less severe and lasts for years. An adjustment disorder, this is kind of what I was talking about with the stages of grief with my friend. A reaction to a specific life event. So she was happy, super great, everything was awesome. Her brother died of cancer, and that took her into depression. So that was the adjustment. I'm going to go over these quickly. I'm not going to spend so much time on those because we have a lot of others to get to. But yeah, so depression warning signs, just persistent, sad, irritable mood. Irritability is a big thing with depression. And then just like lack of motivation to do anything. Difficulty concentrating, loss of energy. So lots of stuff that goes into depression, which, if you read these, it would make sense that it becomes pretty difficult to do just day-to-day tasks. Moving on to personality disorders. So basically the definition is a class of mental disorders characterized by behaviors that differ from societal norms. So with antisocial disorder, basically you have a disregard for others' needs or feelings. So that's why, the criminal being like stealing, fighting with no guilt. This is antisocial disorder. Recurring problems with the law, aggressive, violent behavior. Definitely wouldn't be fun to have interactions with someone that has antisocial disorder. Then you have the avoidant disorder. So maybe super shy and sensitive to rejection, feeling inadequate, inferior, unattractive, fear of disapproval. You've got the dependent one, which is just excessive dependence on others, lack of self-confidence, difficulty disagreeing with others. You have the narcissist disorder, which is kind of interesting. It's the belief that you're special and more important than others. You all can probably think of someone that has this, like maybe not like really, but you're like, oh yeah, that person, they're a narcissist. They have fantasies about power, success, attractiveness. They're very arrogant. So these kinds of people with personality disorders can be extremely difficult to interact with just day to day. And then paranoid, I wanted to save this because schizophrenia kind of falls under that. There's paranoid schizophrenics. And so I have another slide on schizophrenia. So basically, if you have schizophrenia, you lose contact with reality, you hear voices, you think others are out to get you, and your thoughts are just completely jumbled. I do have a video on this. I do want to just put a disclaimer out there that it has kind of been freaky to some of my students. They've kind of been creeped out by it. But it does a good job. It's a simulation of someone that has schizophrenia. So it does a good job at like the voices, hearing the voices, and then kind of like thinking others are out to get you and losing contact with reality. So I highly encourage you to go and watch that simulation if you don't get creeped out too easily. So I think we'll just skip over this, but it's pretty interesting with the things that people that have schizophrenia, the things they go through. I would not want to have to deal with. Just hearing voices alone, and those voices aren't necessarily nice. They're usually telling you to hurt people, and that's scary. Let's see, I think that's all with my PowerPoint. So, okay, I know this is long. Half hour was not how you wanted to spend learning about mental illnesses, but you do have the other option of kind of going through that Nearpod and doing it more interactive, but this is just like more straight to the point, going to give you the information that you need because, again, you will be tested. So if just listening to my voice isn't going to cut it, I highly encourage you, again, go and watch those videos on that video page that I have in GradPoint. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I check emails multiple times a day. You can always text through Remind because I have that set where you can respond to texts or you can text me through it. So just feel free to ask me if you have any questions. And hopefully you have a better understanding of these disorders.